I'm on the edge, about to fall off, and nobody knows. I'm a normal guy. You'll see me on the street, in the mosque, down the local shop. I blend in. I'm surrounded by friends, a loving family, a community, but no one addresses the elephant in the room. I could be your neighbor, your teacher, your sister. I'm hiding in plain sight behind a mask of shame. It started socially, my friends and I having a flutter. An accumulator bet was the hook that caught me. I won, and I won big. The addiction gripped me so furiously that it took over my whole life. I gambled any time, any place, and no one knew. At home, at the mosque, surrounded by love, by grief, and the shurm was always there, increasing with every bet and every lie I told. It weighed me down. It controlled me, forcing me to live two lives. I couldn't keep up with my addiction. I needed more money to feed the monster. The bets got bigger, and so did the lies. There were fake investments, payday loans, borrowed money from friends and family. And when I hit rock bottom, I sold my car, my wife's jewellery, and even my son's bike. When I couldn't access money from anywhere else and had nothing more to sell, I turned to criminal activity, stealing money from my family's business and committing fraud. I hurt so many people, I was harming myself too. The turning point in my story was when the police showed up at work, and that was it. It was out in the open. Everyone knew. I felt an enormous sense of relief, like a bird being released from a cage. But I lost my job, my wife, my home, and my izzat. I knew I had to stop. Admitting to myself that I was a gambling addict hit me with such force that it hurt. I needed to stop. I reached out to my faith leader and discovered that talking is not a weakness. My religion has shown me how delicate the soul is, and talking can make you stronger. I opened up to my friends, my family, and members of the community. Eventually, I found the Beacon Counselling Trust, and with it, professional help. It started with their free self-assessment tool. Answering a few questions helped me get the right support I needed. I went to group therapy, and it was here I found non-judgmental people who understood and cared. We talked, and talking is important for healing. Don't suffer in silence. Speak up and reach out. I'm in a good place now, getting my life back on track. I realise now that the more you suffer in isolation, the more destructive the addiction gets. But don't leave it too late like I did. Early intervention is key. Don't hide behind your shurm. Open up, seek help. Take control. Take action.
Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to this addressing gambling harms across Lancashire and Cumbria webinar this morning. And thank you so much just for giving the time just to learn a little bit more about gambling related harms, just to hear some of the things that we're going to be talking about today related to the training that's available to staff and volunteers and the support that's available to people who are experiencing gambling related harms. And as you'll hear today, as people speak, these are very real harms that are live and present in our communities. Just a quick introduction really to the session. There are 11 speakers. We've got 2 hours. If you would like to ask a question while someone is presenting, you'll notice that at the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A icon. You can click on that and then just post your questions. I believe you can like questions, and so that would be really helpful for us. So instead of repeating questions, if you just indicate a like for a question, that gives us a sense of importance related to questions. In that question, you can ask which speaker you would like to answer that question, or we will just open it up to the panel of people available. But anyway, thank you for joining us. So just a quick introduction to myself. I'm just going to be talking a little bit about a commissioner's perspective. So I'm a commissioning manager. I work for Cumbria County Council, and my job really is to understand the needs of the community and to design and develop services that meet those needs. And one of the services I'm currently responsible for is treatment and recovery services for people who have an addiction. And historically, that has been viewed as alcohol and drugs. But as you will learn today, there is a growing understanding of the harm that gambling does bring. So if you could just go to the next slide, please, James. So one of the things you'll become aware of, and that I as a commissioner have become aware of, is that there is a growing public and professional awareness of gambling related harms. And quite often it's knitted into and related to other harms that are experienced. And there's a growing understanding of gambling related harms. So I'll talk very briefly soon, and others will talk in more depth about some of the research and the findings about how large some of the challenges are in relation to what harms they are, what causes them. But there is also at the same time a growing response to support and treat people experiencing gambling related harms. And we'll talk about that as well today. Next slide, please. So I don't know if any of you are aware, but the BBC, and it is available on iPlayer, I think probably to the end of the year. And this is a documentary by an English football player, played for Arsenal as well, about his addiction with gambling. He is very frank and vulnerable about the challenges, but he starts to look at some of the science. How does gambling affect his brain, for instance, which is a really interesting section of this, this documentary. But he says that he has probably lost in the region of £5 million. You would think an English football player would own his own home. He doesn't, unfortunately. And it's a really good documentary, and I just encourage everyone just to view that documentary. Next slide, please. So there's also just a growing understanding, and Public Health England, currently that their name has changed to the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities. And they've recently published a report on their review of evidence related to gambling related harms. And they've just in relation to Cumbria, which has a population of nearly 500,000 people. If we take those facts, which they look at across the whole of the country, and we say that there are 40% of people gamble, that means that there are actively 200,000 people gambling in Cumbria. Of those, 4.4% or 22,000 are at risk due to gambling. That means that their gambling is placing them in a situation where they are vulnerable to harm. And 0.5% of the population, or in Cumbria, 2,500 people have a problem with gambling. They are experiencing harms, at times significant harms. And their harms, they're clearly not only affecting themselves, but they're affecting those around them. And the research that Public Health England have done is basically shown 7% of the population are negatively affected by gambling. So in that little video that we saw, you know, the selling of a child's bicycle to support a need to gamble affects that child's health and well-being. The stealing from the business affects the economy and the well-being of that family and drives people into poverty. And so gambling doesn't just affect the individual. And one of the things which, one of the reports which have been developed looks into what are the risk factors that are evident, and those are some there. People who exhibit impulsivity, quite often there is a connection to substance misuse, whether that's alcohol, tobacco, illegal drugs. I think what will come out in some of the slides a little bit later is that it is predominantly males, quite often people who are experiencing depression, who have peers who gamble. Quite often there's a connection to violence and poor academic performance. And so we can, when we look at people under the age of 18 and we make this and we realize that here are a collection of characteristics that the likelihood, they say that there is high confidence that someone who is demonstrating these characteristics under the age of 18 will go on to experience gambling that leads to harm. And there's just a list of the types of harms being caused: financial or relational disruption and conflict, cultural stigma and isolation, obviously a reduced performance at work or study because people are distracted and feeling that continual need to gamble. And clearly, as that video showed, there can be a connection to criminal activity. And all of these have an impact on people's mental health and their well-being. And because of that, local authorities and the NHS have a statutory duty under the Social Care Act to respond to improve people's health and well-being. James, just next slide. So just some of the things that we're looking to do in Cumbria is firstly just to raise an awareness of the need, and this is one of the reasons why we're holding this webinar, is just to make people aware that there are people in our communities who are silently struggling with gambling. And because it is not visible on the outside, it is quite difficult to detect unless we open up conversations with people. The next thing we're doing is we're going to be promoting the availability of support and training for people who are experiencing gambling related harms. In Cumbria, we're looking to create a forum where agencies can talk to one another about coordinating a response. And next month, we're going to be holding a Cumbria addictions group, and one of those subgroups will be a gambling group. And we'll be looking at a multi-agency response to supporting people. We also realize that there is a need to further understand what does this mean locally in relation to data. So we're looking at some of our contracts to make sure that where people are being supported, that we're asking the question around, do they gamble? Does that have a negative impact on their life? So we can have a growing understanding of the need in our community. And we're also looking to develop our workforce's competencies. So some of the training opportunities that you'll see today, and we're looking for some of our staff and volunteers to participate in those. And we also, what we want to do is we want to make sure that there is integration with relevant existing services. So I'm aware that the NHS current in Cumbria have a mental health service called First Steps, and they have recently appointed gambling champions, and they're developing an understanding of what that means for their service. I'm aware that KDAS, which is a local charity in Cumbria, who give advice around alcohol and drugs, on their helpline, and they're currently saying if people have a problem with gambling, that they can phone them and they can talk to someone local if they would prefer a local contact. And so we're looking at how we can make sure that existing services are working together. So that's just my brief introduction to today's webinar. Samuel, who's picture you can see there is unable to join us. Samuel works for the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, and his responsibility is gambling. He apologizes for not being able to attend, but he's prepared a short video for us. James, if you could just roll that.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all well. I'm Samuel Bostock. I'm a Health and Wellbeing Manager at the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities North West, where I lead on gambling-related harms and tobacco control. I'm sorry I can't be there with you this morning, but I'm delighted to have been invited to say a few words in supporting the communities across Lancashire and Cumbria in addressing gambling-related harms. Hope you can all hear me and see me clearly. I've had a few technical problems, as ever, this morning, and so I'm filming from my mobile phone, but let's hope it goes smoothly. Firstly, it's terrific to have such a range of organisations on the webinar, and a big well done to all involved in putting this together. Hope you all can make the most of the opportunity to find out more about gambling related harms, to network with new colleagues, and to listen and to obviously contribute. In my short time working on gambling related harms, I've been struck that gambling is an issue about which almost everybody has a view. Expectations are high and people are watching, more attuned than ever before to issues around fairness, safety and the protection of children and vulnerable people. Those who gamble and those who don't are looking at the sector and asking what is being done. Does it do enough? Does it go far enough? And could we all do more? And doing more is the reason we are here today. In the UK, gambling is a legitimate and popular leisure activity, enjoyed by many. This is a successful industry. The UK has one of the biggest gambling markets in the world, generating a profit of just over 14 billion last year. It features in many dimensions of British life, with markets for gambling created in everything from the Premier League to politics, from Bake Off to I'm a Celebrity. Gambling is intertwined with sport, with the media, and through the National Lottery and Society Lotteries, it is a direct funder of cultural, sporting and community life in Britain. However, over the past couple of years, it has become increasingly clear that problem gambling is an underestimated and often misunderstood public health concern. Politicians, academics, national regulators and commissioners have helped to raise the profile and increase understanding of gambling-related harms. However, at a local level, action on this issue is often under-resourced and disjointed. Previous research has shown that harms associated with gambling are wide-ranging. These include not only harms to the individual gambler, but their families, close associates and wider society. There have been growing calls by the public health community, people with lived experience, and members of Parliament that a population level approach is needed to tackle this public health issue. However, there was a need to fully understand the extent to which gambling is a public health issue, for whom it is a problem, and the extent of the possible harms. Therefore, Public Health England was tasked to conduct an evidence review of the health aspects of gambling related harm to inform action on prevention and treatment. This review, which was published in September of this year, has brought together and analysed the best available international research evidence on risk factors and gambling-related harms. The evidence suggested that harmful gambling should be considered a public health issue because it is associated with harms to individuals, their families, close associates and the wider society. Gambling-related harms has a considerable cost to society too. It's likely to be in excess of 1.27 billion. The most socio-economically deprived and disadvantaged groups in England have the lowest gambling participation rates, but unfortunately have the highest levels of harmful gambling, and they're also the most susceptible to harm. So that if no interventions are put in place to improve this situation, harmful gambling is likely to make existing health inequalities worse. The harms identified in the research and the cost to society suggest that more needs to be done to prevent and reduce the harms associated with gambling. So to address these gaps in the evidence base, PHE is undertaking what's called a Delphi study, and this study aims to identify what policies and interventions could be adapted from public health to address the gambling-related harms identified in this review. The Office for Health Improvement and Disparities, I'm pleased to say, will work in partnership with other government departments and key stakeholders to develop a work plan which will address the knowledge gaps that were identified in the review, improve data collection, deliver effective and implementable responses to gambling-related harms. In the North West, I recently took a presentation summarising the latest research to the North West Directors of Public Health, which outlined the next steps for our region. And we'll be working hard to reduce the exposure of vulnerable people and groups to gambling products, to also reduce the consumption of gambling products themselves, to reduce gambling-related harms to individuals, families and communities, and lastly, to make treatment for problem gambling visible. We also want to work closely with the public health teams across the region to work up a North West framework for local areas to work on, whilst we also inform the Delphi study. So I'll finish there. I hope I've not waffled on for too long, and I hope you've been able to hear me and see me. I'm impressed by all the developing work that is taking place across Lancashire and Cumbria, which is supporting people like
Great. Well, that was a sudden end to Samuel's video there, but just like to hand over to Jan, who's a social prescriber in Copeland, and yeah, just some of the impetus to get this webinar sort of originates in the team that Jan works in. So Jan, handing over to you.
Thank you, Noel. Hello, everybody. As Noel said, my name is John Fotheringham, and I'm a social prescribing community support worker for Copeland Borough Council in Whitehaven in Cumbria. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about our social prescribing project, which is part of Copeland's housing and social inclusion team. Next slide, please, James. So what is social prescribing? It is an initiative that aims to improve the lives of people in our communities using a holistic approach in a non-medical way. And in practice, that means it's about connecting people to community groups and social activities to help their well-being. So research shows that 1 in 5 people go to their GP with social issues rather than medical problems. The social issue could be causing a medical problem too, but studies also show that people feel better faster when they are connected to activities and support in their local communities than those treated with medicine alone. For example, we know that life events such as relationship problems, bereavement, loneliness or debt issues are likely to cause people anxiety and possibly depression. We also know that loneliness is as bad for health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. All these issues and many more can be addressed by our fantastic local services and third sector groups here in Copeland. And in Copeland, we have a unique offer as we have 2 different types of social prescribing. In our roles at Copeland Council, we support our local community groups and services to be as strong and sustainable as possible to continue their much needed offer to our community. For example, we work hard at signposting our groups to relevant funding streams. We seek out volunteers for them, find alternative venues for them where possible, connect them up to other groups for partnership working, and generally support them in any way we can. And in addition to this, we identify gaps in services across the borough and support existing groups to fill those gaps where possible. We also work in partnership with our NHS social prescribing link worker colleagues who work face to face with people who are referred to them by their GP or other health teams. They can then signpost them to the best source of help and support in the community. So between us, we offer a really good range of support to the people of Copeland. The benefits of social prescribing: we know that being active, learning new things, getting involved in the world around us, engaging with others really helps improve our health and well-being. And our project helps people to take part in activities who help with all of those as we've developed a social prescribing directory of resources. And this is to be found on our Copeland Borough Council website under social inclusion. The directory lists almost 70 helpful local groups and services who support people over 18 in the following ways: digital awareness, financial hardship, welfare and benefits, housing and homelessness, low-level mental health, physical health, loneliness and isolation. And volunteering has also become a big part of our project, and we work with our local voluntary service in sourcing volunteers for our groups. Over the last 18 months, these people have given over 4,000 volunteer hours to different organisations. And this has got many benefits for the volunteers as well, as they make new friends and learn new skills, often leading to job opportunities for them. All of this helps to lessen social isolation, which, as we all know, has increased hugely during the COVID pandemic. Next slide, please, James. So how does social prescribing work in Copeland? Well, as you can see, we have 4 referral routes. So the first one is via our own Copeland Borough Council or County Council teams. We have many departments such as our customer services and other teams who may talk to people who would benefit from our service, and so they can refer them to our directory. Also via the NHS social prescribing link workers who I just mentioned earlier, they work with the people referred to them by GPs and health teams and put them in touch with support in the community. The groups and services on our directory also cross-refer to, and they have done for years, they just haven't called it social prescribing. So for example, if someone is going to a friendship group and they mention they have financial issues, the group leader may refer them to another organisation that can help using our directory. And last but not least, the self-referral route. So anyone in our community who wants to can connect directly with any group or service that they would feel would benefit them using our social prescribing directory. And although our project covers Copeland, quite a lot of the groups and services on there cover our neighbouring borough of Allerdale too. We also have a social prescribing forum which helps groups to network, share information and collaborate with each other. This is useful for things like joint funding applications and reduces duplication of work by linking them up to work in partnership on new projects. Next slide, please, James. So this is a snapshot of the directory on our Copeland Borough Council website. It does look a little small on here, but it is much easier to read and expand on the website. And this will continue to grow as we are always adding more services to it. Next slide, James. So why are we here? As I mentioned earlier, part of our social prescribing role is to identify what services may be needed in our community and to pinpoint any gaps. In our work, we identified that gambling harms is an important emerging public health issue. This webinar, as Noel said, has been created to better understand what support is available, how it can be accessed, and to identify and find out if there is even more we can do. We know there's a demand for gambling support in our community, and this is a great opportunity for us all to raise awareness of what is out there. Next slide, James. So lastly, here are the contact details for our Copeland Borough Council social prescribing team and also for our NHS link worker colleagues. And if anybody watching is part of a group that they think would benefit from being part of our social prescribing project, please get in touch. And especially if you know of anybody else who might want to take part, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jan. Yeah, it's good to see the social prescribing, the way you guys are linking and creating communities. It's really encouraging, and all the good work you're doing in improving people's health and well-being. So thank you. So we're now just going to move on to Neil Plett. Neil's a clinical director at Beacon Counselling Trust. And as a real passion to help and support people experiencing gambling harm. So, Neil?
Morning to you all. Thanks, Noel. And it's a pleasure to be here this morning. As Noel said, my name is Neil Platt. I am the Clinical Director of the Beacon Council and Trust. And my short presentation today is going to cover, in simple terms, an overview of the work that Beacon delivers, and then a short perspective of the landscape relative to gambling, what we call gambling related harm nationally, and more importantly, relative to Lancashire and Cumbria. Furthermore, I'm going to explain why gambling related harm should be considered a public health issue, and how we can engage with both this issue and support somebody affected or at risk of being affected by gambling related harm. So to begin with regard to the Beacon Council and Trust, we were established in 2010. We've been going for over 11 years now, and our core programs include the likes of eating disorders, the Improving Access to Psychological Therapies program. We run children and young people's program. We have a veterans program, carers. I lead on the biggest suicide bereavement program in the UK, all of which link into the issue of gambling related harm. And to support that, I lead on the service to engage with those at risk of or affected by gambling related harm across the northwest of England. And that service from a geographical perspective starts at the Welsh border and runs up the northwest corridor up to the Scottish border. Our service provision covers a number of supplementary programs, such as we have a big program on criminal justice and gambling related harm, our workplace charter, and our work with the Trade Union Congress, our South Asian work, our families work, and our major public health education offer. Combined, we're the biggest provider of these services in the UK, both with treatment and support and education. And I'll talk about some of the figures a little bit later. So moving on to landscape. Firstly, can I say that gambling in the UK is normal, and that's a fact that we should not shy away from. While some individuals may challenge that statement, Napoleon once said that we were a nation of shopkeepers. I think today I can demonstrate for very, very clearly that we're a nation of gamblers. However, that said, there are many aspects of this normalization that give me personally lots of concern, and that are clearly wrong. They're wrong because they're not in the interest of both individuals and, from a wider perspective, that of the wider population. And those issues of wrong cover considerable what we call as gambling related harm, which begins at what we call low level harms, and then moves on to the contribution of the more catastrophic and family devastating issue of suicide. With over 40% of the population having gambled in the last 4 weeks in the UK, over half of them did so online. And that reflects that many tens of millions of individuals are buying lottery tickets, betting on sports, playing bingo and everything else. Another fact that we shouldn't shy away from is that gambling exists to make a profit and taking money from its customers. At over 14 billion, gambling in Great Britain is the size of British agriculture, and over 450, should I say, that's 450 pounds per second were lost by people gambling in Great Britain in 2019 to 20. Massive figure. However, disproportionately, considerable amounts of that money were placed by individuals who were both vulnerable, as Noel said earlier, and experiencing disproportionate levels of gambling related harm. With recent figures indicating that over 60% of industry profits were generated by 5% of players. And I think there's some link there with the vulnerability of those individuals. These individuals are often suffering from financial, psychological, and physical harm, and often result in life-changing events. The experience of my organisation of working at the front line of gambling-related harm is that these events are real, they are life-changing, and they can happen to anyone. Gambling, as I said earlier, is normal. However, gambling-related harm should not be. This issue requires a public health approach, and I'm working extensively with the Royal Society of Public Health. So my friend and colleague, Aaron Mansfield, is going to be talking a little bit later. So we're working with the RSPH and as part of the Cumbria addiction strategy with Noel to help take this forward. A public health approach involves defining the problem, the causes and risk factors, and implementing population-wide strategies to reduce or engage the wider population. The starting point of this strategy is population awareness, and I'm so pleased to be here today to bring this issue into your awareness. And the reason why, in my opinion, that this strategy is so important is that on the slide that's currently up is that you'll see that from the IPPR report in 2016, which is one of the first reports to engage with the issue of gambling-related harm, is that a problem gambler is 2.65 more times likely to be claiming universal credit, nearly 9 times more likely to be accessing homeless services, 4.5 times more likely to be in prison, nearly 9 times more likely to be accessing mental health services, 5.5 times more likely to be in a hospital inpatient in the last 3 months, and nearly over 2.5 times more likely to have visited their GP in the last 12 months with a mental health issue, costing up to the UK up to 2.2 billion a year. That to me is a public health issue. Okay, so as we move on, let's look at the prevalence of where we are and how that engages across the Northwest. And we haven't drilled down this specifically for Cumbria, but you can take this model, as Noel did earlier, and make some key assumptions. So in the Northwest, the percentage of at-risk gamblers in the region, alongside the Northeast, are the highest in the UK. And nationally, we've got 340,000 individuals suffering from gambling-related harm at the acute end, about 340,000. From a wider perspective, depending on the report that you read, that can go up into millions. So moving on, almost 20% of the UK population experiences some form of gambling-related harms through their own gambling behaviour, or often in the wider family unit. It is estimated between 6 and 10 people are affected by another individual's gambling. And as I said earlier, about 2.2 billion to the UK economy. The most socially, economically deprived and disadvantaged groups in England have the lowest partition rates, but the highest levels of harmful gambling. So those are ones who can least afford to engage with this issue are the most vulnerable. And it's more than just financial losses. And I'm going to be talking about in particular criminality in a few minutes. Noel mentioned that right at the start, and it is a big growing issue. Gambling-related harms are the adverse effects of gambling on the health of the whole of the individual, the well-being of individuals, families, communities, and society from a wider perspective. Rather sadly, some recent evidence indicates that a harmful gambler is 15 times more likely to take their own life than somebody who doesn't experience the issues with gambling. Big challenge here. And what we're also seeing, I mentioned earlier on about the suicide bereavement program, is that those who are bereaved by suicide also have some of the highest rates of going on to develop the issue as a coping mechanism. So what does a public health strategy look like? In simple terms, we have at the base of a public health strategy, the universal or primary education, and that's part of the work that we're doing today, aimed at the whole population to promote a safer environment. As the individual moves up what we call the PGSI, which is a standardized universal screening protocol, which is the problem gambling severity index. And as the severity increases with their gambling behavior, other interventions are required. So we look at early intervention, that is to secondary or selective groups. And one of the groups I know that Suhail's talking about later on is culturally and linguistically diverse. as a target group, as our primary care, those engaging with social prescribing, etc., homelessness and other groups. So we're looking at those secondary groups as a targeted group, and then those that we get to the treatment or tertiary intervention level at the top of the pyramid, those aimed at individuals or suffering gambling disorder. And that is a very, very simplistic approach to public health. And I just want to take 1 minute just to pick up on Noel's point earlier on, and that is that link between problem gambling and criminality. And going back to the other slide that indicates as somebody moves up the public health model, as they move up the PGSI, there is no question is that as the addiction increases, so does the demand for money. Now, the one thing that you need to be able to gamble in the UK is quite simple. You don't need this with drugs. You don't need this with alcohol. There's other ways that you can facilitate the engagement with those particular platforms. Is that you need money to gamble in the UK, right? It's pretty simple. And as the conditions becomes more acute, such as the desire to engage with the addiction, there is a link there with criminality. And we're doing quite a big piece of work with Lancashire and South Cumbria Police to engage with this particular issue. What I'd like to just talk about for 1 minute now is the national strategy to reduce gambling related harms. Well, this strategy was launched in 2019 and covers all of the issues that I've been speaking about. It's led by the Gambling Commission, and they are the leaders on the national strategy. At the heart, there are 4 pillars to it. At the heart of it is through education, prevention and treatment, to specifically to take and to look at a public health approach to engaging with this issue. And that's what we're doing today. So how do we engage with some of them at risk of or experiencing gambling related harm? As part of that strategy, as part of the national strategy, the Beacon Council and Trust offers a free confidential support service to anyone at risk of or experiencing gambling related harm. And as I said earlier on, is that our patch covers from the Welsh border up the Northwest Corridor up into the Scottish border. I said we are the biggest provider of services in this regard. And unusually with regard to general addiction services, we don't only support the individual that is at risk of or experiencing gambling related harm through their gambling, is that we also support the wider family unit and those who are affected by somebody else's gambling. So this is something that we need to, I actually believe that this is one of what we class as the best kept secrets. And unfortunately, Cumbria has some of the lowest presentation rates of people accessing services. And I think that one of the things that I've done over the last few months in engaging within Lancashire and South Cumbria, we had a large success in Lancashire, and Kevin O'Hara from Lancashire Care and NHS Trust is going to be talking early about our partnership work, is the lack of understanding that there is, generally speaking, about this service provision. It's free, it's confidential, right? Before lockdown, we were running out of about 26 locations across the Northwest, and we'll be picking that up post COVID. But currently we're delivering services online or by Zoom, etc. And it's there to be accessed, it's free, and we've got no waiting lists. Often this is facilitated through the national helpline, and we'll be giving the number out for that in just a few minutes. So what can somebody expect when they engage with our services? Referrals can come through. We have a complete open door policy. Referrals can come through literally any facilitation, GPs, criminal justice, veterans, any organization we will collaborate with. Once they get to us, there is initial contract triage where individuals have a very, very short engagement. And then we can work out collaboratively a care plan for them. Our care plan covers, it's a fully integrated care plan. It's determined on the level of need for an individual. So we have tier 2 support and brief interventions. We have then, moving on from there, we have a full comprehensive assessment, and our safeguarding protocols are extremely robust. So we have a tier 3 system there where individuals access a care plan. I say it's collaborative, depending upon the goals of the individual. We then work with multi-agencies at tier 3, and that can be through a variety of other organisations. And often individuals come to us with multiple needs, and it could be debt, it can be family interventions, it can be lots of other things. So we will establish that through our comprehensive assessment. And we also are integrated very, very robustly into NHS services and the support of. We are the biggest referrer of patients into the Northern Gambling Clinic in Leeds, which has satellite offices across the Northwest. So we have a very, very comprehensive and robust care plan from the point at which an individual accesses services. And again, we are very, very well engaged with appropriate other support services. We recognise that the facilitation of recovery is not engaged just with therapeutic interventions alone, is that community-based services and the work that Jan was talking about earlier on are critically important into the recovery of that individual. And we have a full aftercare service. So during 2019-20, we had, on this particular program, we had over 2,500 individuals accessing treatment and support. We delivered education workshops to over 1,500 people, children and young people, and we engaged with over 700 professionals. Our targets for this year are over double that, right? So, you know, we've got a lot of work to do, and we're looking for your support to be able to engage with that. So just in conclusion, a bit of a whistle-stop tour there really about landscape, about the work that Beacon does and our treatment provision. Just going to leave you with this, right? There is no waiting list. It's a free service. It's a confidential service. And when in doubt, please refer in to us. If for whatever reason that people aren't appropriate to us, we will not drop the ball. We will engage with those individuals and we will facilitate a referral into other services. Very, very happy. Some of my team will be talking later on. Very, very happy to take any questions or to contact us outside of this. And we look forward to working with you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Neil, so much just for that great introduction just to the fantastic work sort of Beacon Counselling Trust are doing across the Northwest. I know people speak highly of your service, so just want to say thank you for your presentation. I'm just going to move on now just to Kerry. I'm sorry, Terry, just to hear about his experience of gambling related harm. So Terry, handing over to you.
Thank you. I'm having a bit of a problem with my
We can hear you, Terry.
right. You can hear me now. So my name is Terry Colgareth. I've had a gambling disorder for over 45 years. And just to give people an overview of how that can affect people, I call it the hidden addiction because unlike the other addictions, I'd defy anybody to walk down the street tomorrow and pick out somebody who's got a gambling disorder over somebody who's got an alcohol problem or a drug problem, which is more and more noticeable, shall we say. During that 40 years of gambling disorder, I lived in 27 different houses, homes. I lost 8 relationships through gambling. I had 100,000 and I've attempted suicide twice in the last 10 years. Now, during that 40 years of having a gambling disorder, for 30 years, I worked in psychiatry. I was living a double life. I could help people on a daily basis, but I couldn't sort my own problems out. And no help that I attempted to get was appropriate. My GP didn't know what to do. and my psychiatrist refused to see me, said he couldn't help me. That was in the early years. But over the last 10 years, as Neil has just outlined, it has become more and more prevalent, and more services are out there, and we are getting help. And I'm pleased to say that I'm now 5 years clean of gambling, and I'm now in a position where I've made it my mission in life to help other people not go through the process that I've been through. And so consequently, I'm now a community connector, a first point of contact for anybody suffering with gambling harms. And I give the experience of having been there and bought the t-shirt. So when people are talking to me about their individual problems, I've either been through it myself or know somebody who has. And the thing that is really noticeable to me is that it doesn't discriminate. You know, I remember my father saying to me 25 years ago, "You're not stupid, just stop." If it was that easy, as per the Paul Merson addictive part of the brain scenario, if it was that easy, there wouldn't be 400,000 problem gamblers in Britain today. I think I will keep it short and sweet, because one thing that we have created is a group connected to Beacon called Gambling Harms Northwest Alliance. We are a group of ex-gamblers and affected others, so people who've been affected by another person's gambling. And Nicola, who's going to speak next, will be able to outline how it affects the other members of the family, etc. I'm open to any questions. I do individual presentations, but I'll leave it there because I know that we're a little bit behind schedule, and I'll hand over to Nicola to give her perspective as an affected other. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, and thank you for this opportunity. I just want to talk a little today about the impact of gambling harms on the affected others, the families and wider community of a disordered gambler who can often be looked upon as sort of a byproduct of gambling harms. But talking from personal experience, the shock and trauma of this is very real. So I'll give you a little bit about me. I'm the wife of or former wife of a disordered gambler, unknowingly for more than a decade. I was married at 24 and am now mum to 2 small children. They were just aged 4 and 2 on the discovery of my husband's addiction via a text message from a payday loan company in 2017. At that time, I was 32, broke and broken, and left with those 2 children to support. The family debt as a result of the gambling was in the region of more than £100,000. And as with many families affected by gambling harms, there was a debt, but it was the impact of the legacy harms, emotionally, mentally, physically, on the health and well-being of myself and those around me, that led me to gain a better education and awareness of gambling disorder. Because the truth was, I had absolutely no idea what it was, its components, its complexities, but certainly no preparation for the devastating consequences it was going to wreak on our everyday family life. And I know now I'm not alone in that. Earlier this year, I was forced to sell the family home. And there's an assumption across the masses that a disordered gambler will just want to help. But for those of us associated with gambling harms, the reality and the understanding is very different, and that task is great. And in my case, sometimes too great. It's through the daily practical challenges faced and the toll in man hours that actually requires, I realised that therapy alone for an affected other was simply not enough. It exposed glaring holes that exist across all organisations when trying to work through the aftermath of gambling harms, whilst trying to support and care for a loved one in their time of need. The truth is you're left riding a roller coaster you've never asked to get on. And it's not just a result of the loved one's addiction, it's because of those systems, the establishment, which the family are turning to get help, are the ones that are keeping you strapped in. And what you're left with is a first-class ticket to sit beside a loved one while they're given passage to self-destruct. You're powerless, you're hopeless, and you have no control to stop it. It was Beacon actually who assisted me in the time, but there were so unanswered questions. GDPR, it's a nightmare. I couldn't cancel a TV subscription. I had to access bank accounts, hold necessary conversations to discuss the real problems our family faced. Navigating those finances is a minefield. Then there are court systems, the abuse. Recovery gateways, as Neil explained, have come such a long way, but for the affected others, a lot of us are still left locked outside of them. To put it in some perspective for you, more than 30% of our monthly income dating years had been lining the pockets of bookmakers. The reality of gambling harms. Household possessions like our Hoover had been bought on credit, even our television. Money has no value. It is simply a full fuel for an addiction that has become so deeply entrenched. And there is no manual or directory for helping families rebuild life from the bottom up. So it's with this understanding through lived experience and the minimal research into effect on families living in the wake of legacy harms, I sought to build networks for those working towards safer gambling practices. It's within this community I found greater access to resources, professionals in the field and academic studies, as we've discussed today, and more importantly, priceless lessons that lived experience affords. It's my hope through the willingness in sharing my own story that we can work and explore new innovative ways to increase support for vulnerable families, give a platform for those voices, and seek new methods of early intervention to help drive down the numbers of those subject to gambling harms in the future. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Terry and Nicola, just for your stories and the work you're doing to make sure that people don't buy the t-shirt, and certainly if they get the t-shirt, to lose it as quickly as possible. So thank you so much just for all the work that you're doing. We do appreciate just your vulnerability about your stories. It's appreciated. So thank you very much. I'm just going to hand over to Kevin. Kevin works for Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust as a partnership and development manager. Kevin, just handing over to you.
Oh, thanks very much. Good morning, Noel, and unbelievable to hear Nicola's and Terry's stories. I know them anyway, but every time I hear them, they get more powerful. So I think this is why, this is why we're all here. So you'll be glad to know I've only got one slide, so we're going to move on to it. So I'm just going to take you through our partnership, as in Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust partnership with Beacon Counselling Trust, and what this has led to. And I can only say, being a partnership development manager, but, across the trust, this is probably the best partnership, that's the most fulfilling one, because I know how much of a fantastic service it is, but how much it can help individuals and organisations. So, met Neil, it's a couple of years ago now, Neil, isn't it? So, we've been working together as the NHS and with Beacon Counselling for over 2 years now. And I think Neil stole a few of my stats before, but from a health perspective, we say it's a public health, but from an NHS perspective, it's absolutely, it's an epidemic, isn't it? And we know that. So, just some of the stats, what Neil and some others, compared to the general population, a problem gambler is, 2.69% more likely to have visited their GP in the last 12 months, over 8 times more likely to access mental health services, over 5 times more likely to have an inpatient hospital bed within the last 3 months, and the cost of the public purse, also through the NHS, as inpatient services, 110 million to 290 million. This is in England. Mental health primary care, 10 to 20 million, and secondary mental health care, 20 to 50 million. So you can see how big this problem is, and this money could be being used for other, activity, couldn't it? So, these are some of the things just in front of you that we work with Beacon Counselling Trust with. Obviously, until the pandemic, we actually had Beacon Counselling Trust counsellors embedded with a couple of our counselling services, and we're looking at that again in the future. And that's where like with co-location, you can actually turn around and ask somebody, around the problematic gambling issues, and I was quite a couple of when we were still in a building about 12 months ago. I just heard one of my colleagues who works for the Minds Matter Service, which is IAP Services, it was all confidential, no names or anything, but all I heard were, we work with Beacon Counselling Trust and we can help you with this, and that just made me feel so, so pleased that we've got this, partnership. So we're looking at co-location again in the future, but there's obviously the online way we're doing it as well, that's our trust know that we've got Beacon Counselling Trust as a partner. And we've done training with them in the past, so Neil's team will do actually training with mental health teams or social prescribing teams or different types of training, which, gives you that extra, support and education. We're doing gambling. I won't steal Ian's thunder in a little bit, but we're actually doing some gambling harms training, education within secondary schools. Beacon Counsellor is doing a lot more, but we're actually doing some in partnership in the secondary schools, some of the pilots, where we're not just going on about, self-harm and bullying, but we know that problematic gambling through gaming and issues like that, it's real. So, that's another way that we're working with Beacon Counselling. We're quite proud to actually, the Gambling Harms Workplace Charter, Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust became the first NHS trust to sign up to that. It's took a little time because of the pandemic, but on 4th of June this year, we signed up and became the first trust, NHS trust in the UK to sign up with Beacon Counselling and Unite the Union to actually, because it is, we've got 7,500 employees in Lancashire and South Cumbria Foundation Trust. So, obviously the concern of well-being for our colleagues, we know, or I know from a personal perspective, that there will be, people with gambling issues within your workforce. So this is another thing that we could, looking at through Beacon Counselling Trust and partnership approach, where we're actually working, around the well-being of our colleagues. And this is taken in that we've actually got it in our policy now. We've got it in training of staff. We're working with either bite-sized training or like a day's training. It's our unions are promoting it. And by the way, it's not perfect yet, but we'd like to keep driving this, this forward. And that's the workplace charter bit. And just an overall approach, what Neil was saying, sorry, I've just turned over my page. We're working with, through Beacon Counselling. I think, Neil, we need to reiterate that this is a service, this is a free service, and at the moment, there's no waiting list. And long may that continue. But I just think it just gives us that hope that, if you've got a family member or somebody, which has happened to me with just by working with Beacon Counselling, I think we've all got personal stories as well that we know how big of an issue it is. And we work with our recovery college on doing courses with Beacon Counselling. We've worked with Gambling Harms Northwest with Terry and his fantastic colleagues. We've promoted it within Lancashire County Council. We've got colleagues working on it within that, Armed Forces veterans, and a collaborative right across Lancashire and South Cumbria. So, you know, we just, like I say, I still think we've got a long way to go as an actual trust, because we know how, you know, overwhelmed our services are, all our different services. But I think this is, to us, this feels like a great add-on service. And I don't mean that in any disrespect to Neil, but these are the experts. So, you know, if they can help, you know, why aren't we using them? So thanks very much for listening, Noel, and I know we're running behind a little bit, so I'll get off.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm really encouraged just to hear about the trust signing up to that Gambling Harms Workplace Charter. I know that there is some work going on in Cumbria around looking at talking to large employers like Sellafield. So we're excited to learn just about some of the process that you've gone through there to get that up and running. So thank you very much, Kevin. I'm now going to hand over to Aaron, who works for the Royal Society for Public Health. Aaron, I hand over to you.
Thanks, Noel. Morning, everybody. As I said, I'm Aaron Mansfield from the Royal Society for Public Health. I will try and keep things tight because I know we're a bit behind time. And with all these amazing speakers, I'm really the person you want to hear from least. So I'll try and shave a few bits off. But if there's any more questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A, or I can pick them up afterwards. So a little bit about who we are. So we're an independent multidisciplinary campaigning and education charity. So we work around health promotion and health protection. We have 6,000 members from what we quite grandly call the global public health community. So they range from directors of public health through to students studying public health in universities. We are an Ofqual regulated awarding organisation. So we offer over 6 different qualifications, again in health improvements and health protection, to 40,000 learners each year. I'm going to come back to one specific qualification later in the presentation. We also carry out research and develop policy recommendations around contemporary public health issues, one of which again has been gambling, which I'll mention later in the presentation. And the final part of what we do is around learning design. So we deliver programs of work regionally and nationally, both at the universal level. And Neil showed that great diagram earlier about the different kinds of public health interventions. So some of that is a universal awareness model, and then some of that is targeted at specific groups. And they range from e-learning to training courses across professional and public sectors. So a little bit about our policy campaigns and advocacy work. So on the screen are a few of our more recent policy pieces. In the top left-hand corner, we have a campaign called Health on the High Street, which we ran 2 or 3 years ago. And that looked at how the makeup of our high street can affect our health and well-being. So to do a really crude caricature, if you've got a high street which is full of empty shops, bookmakers, fast food outlets, payday lenders, your choices around what you can buy, what you can use on that high street are restricted compared to if you had greengrocers and chemists and pharmacies. So we looked at how you could create policies which could reshape the high street and look at how you can bring in more of those health promoting outlets and how you can support people who have got high streets where you have a proliferation of fast food outlets and bookmakers and so on. The image in the bottom left-hand corner was a campaign we had called End High Cost Credit. So that was a joint campaign with the End High Cost Credit Alliance to look at the impact of debt and payday loans on people's mental health and well-being. In the top right-hand corner, we have Go in the Distance. So this is part of our wider public health workforce piece, which again relates to our work on gambling. That report looked at how you could upskill the personal trainer workforce. So obviously personal trainers spend a lot of time talking about physical health and well-being, but how could we upskill those people to talk about mental health and well-being and the wider determinants of health? In the bottom right corner, we have Moving the Needle. So that looked at the barriers to vaccination uptake, something which has obviously been in vogue in the last couple of years. We're looking at the some individual barriers to vaccination uptake. That could be misinformation, disinformation, and some of the societal barriers to vaccination uptake, all of which speak to the kind of barriers to accessing gambling support and treatment services that Nicola mentioned. One of our bigger policy outputs around gambling is the Gambling Health Alliance. I think others have made the case brilliantly for why gambling harms and disordered gambling is clearly a public health issue. We've been following the evidence base for a number of years, and in response to that, we established the Gambling Health Alliance 2 or 3 years ago. And this is a collection of stakeholders, and they range from the Royal British Legion through to national social prescribing leads, who come together to raise awareness of the impact of gambling harms and to develop campaigns and policy that can address them. And if you're interested in the work of the Alliance, or if you're interested in joining the Alliance, then please do get in touch and I can send you some more details. Some of our work on gambling. So in late 2019, one of our first reports was called Skins in the Game. And that looked at the relationship between gambling and young people's health and wellbeing. And we did some research and focus groups across England, Scotland and Wales and asked young people for how gambling comes into their lives. Where does it appear? And the two areas in which they were really concerned were sport and gaming. I think, Kev, I think you just mentioned gaming and the impact and the relationship with gambling. I don't know if people have seen much around loot boxes and skin betting and how they've appeared in gaming in the last 10 years, but really recommend having a look at some of the literature around it. There's our report, Parents Only put a couple of brilliant reports out there, but really frightening how the mechanisms used in those games are so similar to gambling and how they could possibly be a gateway for young people. We then ran a campaign last year called Putting a Lid on Loot, so calling for the government to recognise loot boxes as a form of gambling. We also have a free learning on our website, and this is completely free access around understanding and responding to gambling harms. So it's mainly aimed at professionals, so how you can upskill individuals within your organisation to recognise the signs and symptoms of gambling harms and to signpost people towards treatment and support. Again, that's all held on our website. If you'd like any more information about it, then please let me know. Again, others have made the case for why this is clearly a public health issue, so I won't labour the point, but these are two of the more shocking statistics that I think are out there around gambling harms. So 55,000 children and young people estimated to be experiencing gambling problems. And we know if that starts at a young age, then the risk is that follows that young person for the rest of their life. And the odds ratio of suicidality in problem gamblers is 5 times higher than the rest of the population. So a clear evidence of kind of comorbidities and the long-term impact of gambling. And we know that impact was exacerbated by the pandemic. So one stat that the Gambling Commission identified was that 15% of recent gamblers spent more time and money gambling during the pandemic than they did pre-pandemic. And for some of those people, as Neil has mentioned, that gambling will not have been harmful, but for a decent proportion, it could well have been. So that's something that we need to manage as we come out of the pandemic. And as it's a public health issue, then this needs a public health approach. Lots of cogs to that wheel. First and foremost, I think it's about raising awareness of gambling harms, gambling related harms. Speaking of someone who works in public health, I think we're getting there, but I don't think that this issue has parity yet with what I call our bread and butter, alcohol misuse, substance misuse, issues that have been on our radar for years and years. So it's about raising awareness, addressing stigma, advertising the support that's out there. But as Nicola spoke to really powerfully, we can't have an island model where we have support out there and we expect people to take it up. It's about how you overcome those barriers and have interventions that can support people to access that treatment and support. The second part is around skills and training. So how many people can we upskill in society who can have that conversation around gambling harms, who know how to signpost, who can support people into treatment functions? And how do we make sure that's not that's as widespread as we possibly can be within communities? I think the third part is how do we address the cause of the causes? So other people have spoken really powerfully that gambling harms, disordered gambling very rarely exists in isolation. It's often interwoven with other health and wellbeing issues. So how do we have joined up policy, multi-agency work that can address the cause of the causes when it comes to gambling harms? As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, we deliver qualifications across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. 40,000 learners take our qualifications each year, and they range from level 1 to level 3. And they're delivered through our centre network. So these range from local authorities, usually public health teams, to NHS trusts, to schools and colleges, to independent consultants. So they're delivered across the UK by those individuals. I'll just touch upon these quickly, but a few examples of qualifications that we offer. So the bottom left-hand corner is a young man in a young offender institution in the West Midlands. So when they took a qualification called Young Health Champions, and those young people found that when they moved to the prison, they couldn't move around as much, they had to stop smoking, and they had a restricted diet. So they could only eat what was offered at the prison. And they found the consequence of all of those things was that their weight went up. But at the same time, they found that the prison gym, somewhere they could go to mitigate against that, was something that wasn't particularly welcoming and somewhere that they felt they could use. So they ran a campaign to talk about the importance of healthy eating, but also supporting people to access the gym. So overcoming those barriers to help and support, which we just mentioned. The next image is some of our work with the fire service. So again, in the West Midlands, the fire service noticed that when they were going into people's homes and doing what they call their fit and well checks, so making sure that people have got smoke alarms fitted, lots of the causes of avoidable fires came back to health issues. It could be mental health, could be restricted mobility. So we ran a piece of work to upskill those fire service professionals to be able to have conversations around health and well-being as they did those checks. And the last image is some work we did around supporting the police in Wales to be aware of adverse childhood experiences and the impact of trauma when it comes to health and well-being. So making sure that's factored into their response when they're working with people at risk of crime. And where this led us to is a relatively new qualification called a Level 2 award in tackling gambling related harms. So we developed this in partnership with friends and colleagues at ARA, at Beacon Counselling and Unite the Union. And a few reasons why we did it. One, as I mentioned, we wanted to give gambling harms parity with other public health issues. So we don't feel that it has it there yet. If you want a qualification or training around alcohol misuse or substance misuse, you're pretty well served by the market. There was nothing there before for a Level 2 qualification in gambling. And we also wanted to give some recognition to people working in this space, be they community connectors, be they people working in counselling services, a qualification that they can take away with them, which shows that they have got the skills and knowledge to deliver this really important work. It's a full Level 2 Ofqual regulated qualification with a total qualification time of 6 hours, so it can be delivered in a day. It's assessed by a multiple choice assessment. And again, we think this is really important because having that assessment at the end of the day, no one likes sitting a test, but it means that the people completing the qualification come away knowing that they've got the skills and knowledge that they wanted to get through the qualification. There are 2 learning outcomes, again, very crudely. One is looking at the problem, so the nature of harmful gambling, looking at the scale of the problem in England, Scotland and Wales, looking at the signs and symptoms and looking at the impact on health and well-being. And the second is knowing how to provide help and support. So how can you spot the signs and symptoms? How can you open a conversation, carry out a screening test, and then refer someone to support and treatment and overcome any barriers that they might face? And a brief example of how we will be delivering this in Lancashire and Cumbria. So one is through Beacon Counselling, being a centre and doing this for their brilliant Bet You Can Help programme. And the second is through a project which we will be piloting called Communities in Charge of Gambling. And this stemmed from a project we ran in the Northwest called Communities in Charge of Alcohol between 2017 and 2019. And that involved us training up alcohol health champions. So people in communities who can spot the signs of alcohol misuse, have conversations with peers, and then attend community events to raise awareness of the impact of alcohol harms. And crucially, have action in communities. So being the voice of community when they want to see change around alcohol misuse. So that could be raising awareness of a hub of antisocial behaviour, raising awareness of a particular outlet that's associated with underage selling of alcohol. So making sure that they've got a voice in changing how they see the situation. So what we'll be hoping to do is pilot this in Lancashire and Cumbria, working with colleagues at Beacon Counselling. And it's taking the same methodology, but applying it to gambling. So upskilling people using the Level 2 qualification, giving them that awareness of the impact of gambling-related harms and the knowledge and skills around supporting people in support and treatment. And then having those health champions develop a local action plan for how they would like to address what they see as the issues around gambling in their local area. And we will be piloting those over the next 6 months. If you're any interested in finding out more or being involved in the pilot, then please do just let me know. And I will end there.
Great. Thank you very much, Aaron. I do know the Royal Society for Public Health, you guys do great work. I know just a report that I've recently read from yours, a new line on drugs has a potential, I think, to revolutionize the approach to substance misuse. So I know you guys do great work. I'm certainly going to be in touch with you around some of that champions work. So thank you so much. I'm just going to hand over now to Ian, just to talk about Beacon Counselling Trust's education program. Ian, ball's in your court.
Thank you, Noel, and thanks everyone for attending today. Because as has been pointed out really throughout the whole of this presentation, kind of one of the key things within the National Gambling, reduction strategy is certainly not just treatment and support, but certainly for me as a youth worker, education and prevention is key for me. So I'm going to kind of give a little bit more context to some of the programs we offer. I know they've been mentioned, but there might be one or two that we haven't given a particular focus to up until this point. So we just go to the next slide, please, James. The first one that you've already heard about is Bet You Can Help. And kind of what I want to do really is just give a bit more understanding of what that program's about. Well, the first thing to note, it's a first aid approach, very much in the same model as mental health first aid. It's certainly about helping people understand what this issue is about on a universal level. We're conscious that many people, many practitioners and professionals would often tell us when we offer them training is, to be honest with you, I've never received training about this topic before. So it's about making it a kind of foundation where everybody, as a public health kind of approach, starts to understand and see this as something that needs to be on their agenda. So it's about raising their knowledge, skills and awareness about to support their own service users. And ultimately, one of our missions with this piece of work is not only to educate people and raise awareness, but certainly to increase the numbers of people accessing treatment. That is quite fundamental to this programme. It's a great partnership piece of work. We're really proud of it. And only recently, we got acknowledged with an international award that's connected to this piece of work through Vixio. So, in terms of addressing and contributing to safer gambling. So we're really proud about it. What's unique about Bet You Can Help? Well, it focuses on particular vulnerable groups, and we've already heard some of that through the themes of the presentation. And certainly for us, we know that armed forces communities within the criminal justice system, South Asian communities and BAME and culturally diverse communities in general are disproportionately affected. And you're going to hear more about that from Sahel. And, within a workplace, just as an example, we're hearing lots of stuff from workplaces talking to us about their employees having WhatsApp groups and kind of get-togethers where gambling is part of their social activity. We want to support people to make sure they understand about the risks associated with that. And rightly so, and lots of positive comments around the work and the presentations from both Terry and Nicola, how affected others really is very much not represented enough, and we need to do more to support those people, given the fact that we know that there's probably many, many more affected others who need support than there are actual harmful gamblers. So we want to focus on that. Bet You Can Help as a kind of three-pronged approach to it. You can do a Bet You Can Help Now, which is a mini version of the Level 2 award. So it's not accredited, it's not assessed in any way, but what it does, it allows people with lesser time to be able to go through the programme and look at the key elements of what we want people to kind of embrace from that training, and that is to have raised their understanding, know how to identify and support people and signpost to specialist service provision. So that takes about an hour, but alongside that piece of work, we would provide people with a train and learning booklet, and they can read that in their own time. And we anticipate that you're probably looking at some bedtime reading over a couple of hours, but it's packed full of information and there's a directory of services attached to that. As Aaron explained, and a few other people actually, the piece of work we are very proud about is bringing this, and having a tangible piece of accreditation around this subject. So Bet You Can Help Now is the Level 2 award in tackling gambling harms, is what it says. It's a first aid approach to this issue. We're not trying to make people experts, but we're trying to get people to be confident and develop some competence around the subject and know what to do when those issues present themselves. So we often say there's not enough people asking these questions. We want people to start ruling out gambling harms and address the issues that are important. But what we know is that not enough people are actually covering this within their assessments and their general intervention work. So we want to change that. And then lastly, for those people that are really kind of committed and want to do a lot more work with this, then we would offer a train the trainers model, which is over a longer period. That's still kind of getting slightly developed, but we would anticipate you're talking about 2 to 3 days worth of involvement for that piece of work. So that's Bet You Can Help. And as it points out there in the bottom, if you're interested in any of this, any of those types of training courses, then you can email the link there and someone will get back in touch with you. Okay, we go to the next one then. Now, this is where we start to look at our partnership work with GamCare. So the Young People's Gambling Harms Prevention Programme is something I'm very passionate about as a youth worker. I've been working with young people since 1998, and when I think about that, I can tell why I've got a grey beard. But interestingly, up until about a few years ago, and I've specialised in particularly with substance misuse and risk-taking behaviours with young people. But up until a few years ago, I would never have considered gambling to be a young people's concern. I always anticipated that this is an adult issue. And that's not true, that's wrong. So I've had to address my ignorance, and we would like people to do the same. And what's important about this really in a real perspective is I can recall working with young people where gambling was around me and I just didn't kind of recognise it. i.e. you're in a youth club and a couple of young people are playing a PlayStation game, FIFA football, without the loot box issue, they'll bet a can of Coke on who's going to win or a fiver. That happens. Another case working with a young man who I was supporting with cannabis issues, was in looked after provision, the local authority, was incentivised to attend his education provider with loot box credits. So his placement where he was living, the staff, unbeknownst to them, this is about awareness now, they didn't understand that actually in some ways they're colluding with this behaviour by incentivising good behaviour of this young person not to use cannabis and to go to school, but then at the same time buying him loot boxes. This needs to change. We need to help people understand. And I often talk about, well, our team does when we're working with practitioners. If you think about it, as a parent, I've got a 12-year-old daughter, and I'm guilty of this. When she was younger, I took her to the arcade and I gave her a bag of coins and I told her to feed the machines. We need to change our perception of what this is about, because early exposure to gambling and collusion with parents and acceptance and a permissive kind of culture with that isn't helping. So we've got to kind of, maybe come back to basics. What we know is gambling is increasing with young people, and 11% of young people gambled with their own money in the last week. The training helps practitioners understand about these issues in terms of prevalence. The mere fact that there's 55,000 young people classified as harmful gambling is terrifying. And what I would tell you, if you were to increase it to another 89,000 young people who are at risk, that is a real worry. Those numbers are much greater than the young people that are accessing support for alcohol treatment and cannabis use. Okay, up until last year, there was no service for young people. So we've got to do more, and the training is the way to do that. And obviously, as a youth worker, and I reflect this as a youth work curriculum item, it should be included as a safeguarding concern in the same way as all health and well-being issues are included. Our role as youth workers is to help young people in the transition of becoming of childhood to adulthood. And we know that you could almost argue some young people are being groomed into a gamblergenic environment with some of the loot boxes and our culture in general. We've got to support parents and professionals in order to help young people understand what this is about. So our free training to professionals lasts between 1 hour or 3 hours, depending on what you want to do. You have a more involved piece of training. The 3 hour has a CPD kind of link to it. But the free, they're dead easy to access. And, certainly for us, we want to engage a lot more with young people to make them aware of this issue. We've put some links there, our team members, Kylie and James. you can contact them directly. We will work across the whole of the Northwest with school groups, youth groups. In particular, we're keen to work with young people from special educational needs and disabilities because they're a particular vulnerable group to this issue. So, we want to encourage people to take on board this training. Just next one, please. I'm not going to focus too much on this particular breaking the shortham, but I want to give you the kind of reflection, really, in terms of what this training is about. And it's a short mini promo to our work, really. James.
The legal age for the majority of gambling activities in the UK is 18. However, a 2019 study has suggested that the number of young people aged 11 to 16 experiencing harm through gambling is as many as 55,000. So why might young people be developing issues with gambling? Well, one thing to consider would be the links to gambling behaviours within gaming and loot boxes. The way in which gambling is now advertised could also be a factor. Television adverts and social media posts from gambling operators have become increasingly common. Many people are unaware of the support available for young people. GamCare facilitate the National Gambling Helpline, which provides free 24/7 support for people aged 11 plus, alongside the Young People Service, which is a specialist provision. For those based in the Northwest, aged 16 and over, you can contact us directly at Beacon Counselling Trust. If you work with young people aged 11 to 19 and would like to know more about the Young People's Gambling Harm Prevention Programme and our free offer of training, then please contact us on the details provided.
So that's kind of more of a promo. I'm going to speed up now because I know I'm just conscious of time, but I wanted to just finish with the young people's kind of perspective, really, as again, as a practitioner, I will feel we will have arrived somewhere with this issue, particularly with young people, when it's included on early help assessments. At this point in time, I can tell you, because I've been involved in them, there is no reference to gambling in an early help assessment, and certainly a child in needs assessment or children and family assessments when you look at social care and target and safeguarding issues. That needs to change. It needs to be included and have parity with other concerns. I'm not going to focus too much on this particular piece of work in terms of the education of it, because thankfully my colleague, really good colleague actually, Sahel Patel, is going to cover our breaking the shortham piece of work. But what I would say is we've done this particular piece of work to engage with young people from the South Asian community, because they're disproportionately affected by gambling harm for many reasons that Sahel will go into more. But a lot of people say, they're a hard to reach group. This is something that we've changed our opinion on. They're not a hard to reach group at all. I've worked with these groups with Sahel, and actually they're quite refreshingly want to be educated. So I would say it's about us working harder, but more sensitively. I'm going to move past that now and kind of just finish really with a piece around the workplace charter. As Kevin rightly said, we're really pleased and proud that Lancashire and South Cumbria NHS Foundation Trust were the first trust to sign this in the UK. For me, it starts at the top. The commitment to changing this agenda and addressing this issue within our communities is about local authorities and NHS Trust and those key kind of services and agencies really embracing this and pledging to commit to make some changes. So I'm kind of going to leave it there and just say, if you wanted to get in touch with us, my details are there, in particular on the next slide. And I'm gonna leave it there and hand over to Sahel. Thanks, Noel.
Thank you, Ian. Sahel, I'll hand over straight to you. Off you go.
Thanks, Noel. Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. My name is Suhail, and I'm the Cultural and Diverse Communities Lead at Beacon Counselling Trust. And my role is to engage with culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And this was born out from my own experience around gambling harm and the challenges, and sometimes the challenges within the community and the barriers that we ourselves put up through our cultural norms, and the barriers that are structurally within our services, which we now come to realize, especially during COVID, the health inequalities were quite apparent to everybody to see. So these kind of barriers exacerbated the harm that I kind of experienced. And just to the next slide, please, James. What we know is that individuals from minority communities, they tend to experience, if they do gamble, at least twice the harm, and up to 8 times actually. There's some reports have reported. And what we found in some research as well is that gambling outlets and facilities are sometimes targeted in areas where there is a greater proportion of minority communities. Now, I was just looking at the numbers about Cumbria in terms of the Black and minority ethnic communities. Although it's only, the data is quite old in the last census, and the new census will probably give a higher figure, that it was 2.5%. And that doesn't factor in the war in Syria and the events in Afghanistan and other countries around the world, which resulted in individuals seeking asylum and refuge in the UK. Now, that figure will go up, and probably individuals who work for frontline services in Cumbria will probably tell that the number definitely has gone up, and we do see people from diverse communities much more. So I think it's quite important to recognize that these groups are vulnerable groups, because the cultural barriers that we have, the norms within the South Asian communities, the added stigma, the shame, prevents individuals from seeking that support and help. Next slide, please, James. Now, how do these communities perceive individuals who experience gambling-related harm? Gambling is, it's not new, it's been around forever. However, due to the digitization of gambling, it's kind of, and the new level through the introduction of the smartphone, it's everywhere now. So, and the knowledge and understanding seems to be quite low within our community, and individuals are just trying to get to grips with what's happening. And traditionally, what tends to happen is, if a person gambles, drinks alcohol, or takes drugs, then they will be looked, and automatically individuals and community people will shame that person. Well, what do you think you're doing? And slowly that person will experience that shame, that stigma, and that results in isolation, because the values that South Asian communities in the UK, a vibrant community, tend to contribute a lot to the economy, into the everyday lifestyle. However, we do know that when it comes to talking about these topics, then we tend to brush it under the carpet, and it's more about taking personal responsibility for individuals. So instead of seeking help, what individuals will do who experience harm is become more isolated, try and sort out the issue, rectify the issue from themselves, from their own resources, and this leads to a lot of time financial debt, criminality, and marginalization. This kind of transference occurs where families then experience the shame and stigma. Next slide, please, James. So I want to talk about women who experience issues. So we don't tend to have many women coming through our services, or who I talk to, that gamble. But I do know that traditionally, a lot of women from the minority backgrounds may attend bingo halls, may buy lottery tickets and scratch cards, and this is very much similar. It can be very addictive, and it does create, from the anecdotal evidence that I've observed, it does carry a lot of harm in terms of financial harm, and especially domestic abuse. Now, if you do a quick Google search, then you'll find that in the south of England, there were 2 homicides, 2 fatalities, where 2 women were brutally murdered by their husbands, and those husbands had an underlying gambling health issue. And from the anecdotal evidence and talking to faith leaders, they do receive a lot of referrals and from the women folk within the community, and they are often not the first ones to ask for help for their partners who are gambling. So we've not had many instances where women gamble. They're much more likely to come forward to ask for help for their partners or for their sons or family members. Next slide, please, James. Now, so just coming on to my next one, what will these individuals do? So the faith leaders are quite integral, and our work within the minority communities is actually talking to, engaging with faith leaders, as they are the gateway to the community. So they understand the cultural norms. They do hold and yield a lot of respect within the community. They understand the difficulties, the nuances, and hopefully in February and January, February, we're holding at least training for at least 200 faith leaders for the level 2 Royal Society of Public Health qualification that we've already covered, and that will hopefully equip faith leaders to appropriately advise and their constituents, their congregations, or the individuals who come to them, signpost them to the appropriate services. Next slide, please, James. So while our culturally and linguistically diverse communities are generally ill-equipped to deal with such issues like gambling addiction, alcohol addiction, drugs, it's because of lack of conceptual framing. They struggle to sometimes understand what it is, what's allowing the individual, what is the cause. And they might label something completely different. So if an individual is drinking, then they might say, well, he's got an evil eye or something like that, or and there's a lack of understanding around mental health in general. This is getting better. No knowledge of mainstream health support services. This is very true. Even though we may think that the message is out there, when you look at it from the other side, it's very difficult to kind of get that help. And one of the things that we do through our workshops in the masjids, in the gurdwaras, for example, we tend to promote a more focus on the harms rather than responsible gambling, because that also matters in terms of when a person asks for that help, because they look at, for example, the messaging around when the fun stop. This kind of messaging might be culturally inappropriate to engage a community to engage with mainstream services. Sometimes we have individuals who are unable to speak English, and then they struggle to kind of make themselves heard within the community. Stigma and shame that we've already talked about, brushing under the carpet. And also this is quite important, and that's why our work with faith leaders is vital, that we find many faith leaders out there who kind of usurp the role of professional therapists. So they'll try and be the counselor, they'll try and be the debt advisor, and sometimes, unfortunately, the wrong advice can be given. Next slide, please, James. And so what I advocate for, and what Beacon are trying hard to do, is provide a service which is holistic. So respect and awareness of cultural norms and local languages, and accredited qualification or accredited support is given, and is compatible with scriptural values. So we do a lot of work in the Muslim community. So in our presentations, we'll make references to the Quran, we'll make references to the life of the Prophet Muhammad and how he dealt with individuals who experience addictions. And there is a great appetite within the community and community assets. So community leaders, professionals are really interested in addiction in general, especially gambling addiction. And I think all they're looking for is agencies who are able to deliver those services, to engage with them. So we've got the Lancashire Council of Mosques who do extend their reach within Cumbria. So I do know that very soon there will be a mosque which will be in South Lakes. So we're talking, I think, Barrow-in-Furness. So these kind of centres are quite important to engage the minority communities. So I was just kind of conscious of time, so I think I'm up now. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Suhail. Just great to hear the work that you're doing there. I'm sure there are lessons across all faith communities that you're learning there that can be transferred to those communities as well. So thank you so much. So just moving on to Rachel, just to talk about the women's program, and Rachel works for GamCare. So Rachel.
Thank you, Noel. So my name's Rachel Sim. I am training and engagement lead on the women's program at the Northwest. and I'm going to talk about women and gambling related harms. But the first thing I wanted to do was introduce GamCare, because we've had it mentioned quite a few times throughout the session today, but I just wanted to give an overview of what we offer. Next slide, please, James. So we were established 25 years ago next year. We are the leading information, advice and support for anyone affected by gambling harms. We operate the National Gambling Helpline, provide treatment for anyone who is harmed by gambling, create awareness about safer gambling and treatment, and encourage an effective approach to safer gambling within the gambling industry. We have a variety of services. We're most known for the National Gambling Helpline. And in 2019 and 2020, we received over 38,000 calls to that helpline. And we delivered treatment to over 10,000 people across England, Scotland, and Wales. We have our helpline, which is available 24 hours a day. And we also have the web chat, which is an online version of the helpline for people who need a little bit of extra confidentiality. We have our forums and chat rooms that run every day. They're moderated. We have chat rooms for peer support, gamblers, affected others. And we also have a women's chat room as well on a Saturday evening. We have our website, which is full of helpful information, treatment, self-help tools, as well as leaflets that you can order for your services. We have our young people service, which we've mentioned as well. We have Game Change, which is an online CBT treatment course available for people who are concerned about their gambling. And that's done with a GamCare therapist. And people can work at it through their own pace over 8 weeks. And then we have our adult treatment service, which we can run in the Northwest for us. Next slide, please. So why do we talk about women? Well, gambling-related harms can be very hidden, as we've said. So things such as debt, depression, anxiety might not immediately suggest that gambling is the cause. But women make up 80% of affected others who call the National Gambling Helpline and 20% of gamblers. And the number of women with a gambling problem is rising at a rate of more than men. Next slide. So what does women's gambling look like? Well, for a start, women don't use the language of gambling. They use the language of taking part or playing. So they might not see what they do as gambling activity. Women do it to escape, to soothe, to reduce stress and distract. They might have experienced trauma in their lives, either past or present. They may do it as a coping mechanism to release firm situational stress or the demand from others. Often loneliness is a key factor. So things like relationship breakdown, empty nest syndrome, or the death of a parent can all impact. Women begin gambling later in life than men, develop problems more quickly, but do seek help faster than men. Women are more likely to gamble on chance-based games such as slots and roulette, lottery bingo rather than sports betting. 70% of women who gamble use an app or a website to gamble. Women do something called telescoping, which is the rapid development of a problem due to continuous play. And we find that it's because of the games that women play. There's a short time between the bet and the outcome, which gives a fast display of results, which may explain why some individuals continuously play because they feel like the win's just a short while away. And it's hard to find services that speak to women's experiences. Gambling support services are seen as very much as a male environment. But women refer to things like flexibility, accessibility, but also feelings of shame and embarrassment and stigma as well. They may be unaware of support services that are out there. And some people still think, some women especially, think that gambling is a male problem, so don't think a support service would meet their needs. Next slide. So we conducted a Women's Voices survey in 2020, and these are some of the findings. The majority of women felt that gambling treatment support services were beneficial and helpful, but the biggest barrier was the shame, embarrassment, and stigma, and that was mentioned by 44% of respondents. Trauma was cited by some women in the survey, and recognise this as a recurring theme for women who gamble and experiencing harms. Other barriers included accessibility to treatment and support services, and women wanted services to be more welcoming. There's a lack of awareness of services and treatment support available. There's a lack of awareness of gambling-related harms and support services amongst other professionals, including healthcare staff. 21% of respondents were using or had access to social media groups such as Facebook and Twitter as a means of support. And there is a change in gambling participation from method of gambling at the start as to when it becomes problematic. A shift to more women participating in slots when it does become problematic. Next slide, please. So what does the women's programme at GamCare offer? So we offer free training to increase your knowledge, skills and confidence to discuss and support individuals who experience gambling related harm. We want to ensure that women get the right support at the right time. We can provide information, advice and ongoing support on how to identify gambling related harms and how to make a referral, what services are available. We can attend network events, team meetings and women's groups to keep gambling harms on the agenda and to amplify women's experience. And we can engage directly and support women who might be at risk of experiencing gambling related harms. So I'm going to hand back over to Noel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Just so good to hear of all the work that you do. And I know people who've participated on your training who found it very informative and helpful for their roles. So thank you so much for what you're doing. Just a quick note, we've got sort of 8 minutes left until 12 o'clock. I'm just going to close with the final slide, but we have answered every question that's been posted to the question and answers chat facility. But if you do have any other questions, we may have some time to answer it, but I'm just going to go through this slide and then we'll look at just final questions. But clearly, as we've gone through all of these presentations, I anticipate that this may be an eye-opening session for many here. It may be that it's just confirmed what you've already know to be true. And I would just encourage two groups, really. I guess the first group is just people who do gamble and are finding that they're experiencing harms because of that. Right there's the National Gambling Helpline, which can be a starting point just for asking for help. And what I do enjoy about the GamCare's website is just as gambling appears to be moving online, GamCare's support is equally moving online. So their online chats and their forums are an excellent resource. And the other surrounding and supporting information there is excellent as well. So, and obviously then, if you're living in the Northwest and you want to access support through Beacon Counselling Trust, please get in touch with them. And we will be sharing these slides. They'll be available. Contact details are on those slides. So please do be in touch. I guess that the next person I'd like to just talk to and just encourage really going forward is staff and volunteers who are working in organization. It may be that your main focus isn't gambling. And I guess my question to you is, how can you start to introduce discussions about gambling in your organization? And if you're a little bit uncertain of that, I'd just recommend the number of training courses that have been mentioned today. Ian spoke about the training they offer, Aaron spoke about the training they offer, and Rachel's spoken about the training they offer. So there are lots of training resources out there that staff and volunteers can access so that they can grow in an understanding of, how do I start these conversations? What signs can I look to create opportunities to have those discussions? I guess that the next group of people is to employers. And there was mention here of the Gambling Related Harms Workplace Charter. And I think that would just be fantastic, just for senior people within organization to look to getting behind their employees who are starting to experience gambling related harms. It'd be good to see those as becoming a common part of human resource functions, where supervision of staff looks to encourage people. I guess the other thing also just to say is, for those of you who work with young people, I guess after hearing Ian talk about himself being a youth worker and not necessarily identifying it as an issue, now he's starting to see how it's embedded in youth culture. I just really want to encourage you to become a champion, to start to see some of those things challenged in our young people so that they can start to engage in healthy and productive activities. I guess the other person to speak to is those people who are affected by gamblers. And just to say, just as you've heard today, there is support available. I know in Cumbria, what we're going to be looking to do is just making sure that we're not just supporting the gambler, but we're supporting the person who is affected by them. Because I'm sure social workers are working in families where gambling is hidden. And so please do look for help. Please do say we need support. It is important. Right, so
no, we do have one question that I can't answer. So I'm thinking maybe Jan can help with this one, because it's relating to social prescribing. And what can you tell Helen Horsley about what the offer that might be present in Barrow and Furness?
Okay, thanks, Ian. Yes, there are social prescribers down in Barrow and surrounding areas. So if Helen wants to leave her details, I can email her the details.
Thanks, Jan.
Great. Well, everyone, I think we've gone through and answered everyone's questions online, but I guess finally, I'd just like to say to everyone who's given their time to present today, thank you very much. And to James, who's behind there in the background, making sure that everything moves smoothly between presentations. Thank you, James. And to everyone who's given their time as a part of their working day to join us, thank you so much for your time. And we look forward to working together with you to reduce gambling-related harms in our communities and families. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.